Let's dive right in. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking an absolute game changer in aerospace engineering that just went down over the South China Sea. What we're looking at here is a fundamental shift in reusable rocket architecture. It's a completely wild approach that ties directly into one nation's massive long-term space ambitions. Picture this, it's July 10th, 2026. Out in the middle of the ocean, a massive 25,000-ton platform named Pilot, or Linghangzhe, did the unthinkable. It literally caught a falling orbital rocket booster mid-air. And to be clear, we are not talking about some small-scale prototype drop test. This was a live, orbital-class recovery that completely reimagines the mechanics of bringing spacecraft back to Earth. You know, the internet had an absolute field day with this. One Reddit user hit the nail on the head, pointing out that while SpaceX has been catching their giant Starship boosters with launch tower chopsticks, China basically just used a gigantic mechanical spaghetti spoon. It's hilarious, sure, but jokes aside, the engineering required to make that spoon work is nothing short of extraordinary. Section 1. A historic rocket recovery. So let's zoom in on exactly what happened during this record-setting maiden launch. Lifting off from Hainan, the Long March 10B is an absolute beast of a two-stage liquid rocket. We're talking 63 meters tall, a 5-meter diameter, and a liftoff mass of 760 tons. It successfully put its payload into orbit, but the real magic happened back down in the atmosphere. Just 6 minutes after stage separation, the massive first stage, powered by 7 YF-100K engines, descended 430 kilometers downrange. The upper stage kept going to space, but that first stage came back down to be caught safely at sea. Section 2. The payload weight problem. Now, you might be wondering, why go through all the trouble of catching a rocket with a giant net? It all comes down to an absolutely crucial physics concept called dry mass. You see, a reusable rocket has to carry its landing gear all the way up to the edge of space and back. Every single pound of heavy landing struts, hydraulics, and deployment gear you bolt onto a rocket is a pound of actual payload you can't haul into orbit. The beefier the legs, the less cargo you can carry. It's a brutal trade-off. Think about the SpaceX Falcon 9 compared to this Long March 10B. It's a tale of two entirely different engineering philosophies. The Falcon 9 relies on heavy, built-in hydraulic landing legs so it can touch down on a flat drone ship. China looked at that and went a completely different route. They removed the legs entirely. Instead, the 10B just has 4 lightweight hooks mounted on the booster. By stripping away all that heavy landing gear, they save a massive amount of weight on the rocket itself. Section 3. How net capture actually works. So the million-dollar question is, how does shifting the landing gear from the rocket to a ship actually work without ending in a giant fireball? The science platform Gawker actually had a brilliant analogy for this. They pointed out that engineering-wise, this is exactly like a fighter jet using a tailhook to catch an erecting cable on an aircraft carrier. The drag force bleeds off the speed. Except instead of a plane coming in horizontally, it's a falling skyscraper coming in vertically. Here's the play-by-play of how they pull this off. First, the booster uses grid fins to steer, then fires up its engines to hover. Down below, the massive 144-meter-long pilot platform is using dynamic positioning to stay perfectly steady in the ocean waves while tracking the rocket with LiDAR. The rocket drops in, those lightweight hooks snag a cross-shaped buffered net, and all that kinetic energy is safely absorbed layer by layer. Finally, a massive clamp locks it down tight. They basically took the heavy landing gear off the rocket and put it on the boat. Section 4. Fueling China's lunar ambitions. But listen, this net capture milestone isn't just them flexing their engineering muscles. It is fundamentally tied to China's immediate space economy. Because they ditched those heavy landing legs, the Long March 10B can lift a staggering 16 metric tons of payload to low Earth orbit while still being fully recoverable. For a reusable setup, that number is an absolute game changer. And they desperately need that payload capacity right now. They're racing to deploy massive broadband internet constellations like the Thousand Sails and Guowang networks, which require shooting tens of thousands of satellites into space affordably. But even more crucially, this specific rocket family is the backbone for their plan to put taikonauts on the moon by 2030. Variants of this exact hardware will launch the Menzhou crew capsule and the Lanyard lunar lander. Figuring out reusability is what actually makes that multi-launch lunar architecture financially possible. The sheer pace of this development is wild. In February 2026, they were just doing a controlled ocean splashdown test. By July, they nailed the historic net catch. And CASC, the state-owned aerospace corporation, is planning to inspect and refly this exact same booster before 2026 is even over. They are moving fast, all marching aggressively toward that 2030 crewed lunar landing target.
Section 5. The Global Reusable Rocket Race.
So let's zoom out. How does this fit into the global, high-stakes race for reusable rockets? Domestically in China, the Long March 10B just took a massive lead. Other vehicles, like the private Sukhoi 3 and the state-linked Long March 12A, both reached orbit recently, but they failed their booster recovery attempts. The 10B is the first one to actually close the loop and bring the hardware home safely.
Globally speaking, SpaceX is obviously still the undisputed king here. They've got over 600 recoveries under their belt, and they routinely fly individual boosters 30 times or more. They've made it look boring, which is the ultimate compliment. Meanwhile, you've got Japan just finishing up an 11-meter vertical test with their RBX, and South Korea aiming for reusability by 2032. But with this net capture, China has firmly planted its flag as the second nation on Earth capable of orbital booster recovery. Which leaves us with one massive question to chew on as we wrap up today's explainer. Proving you can catch a rocket with an ocean net is brilliant. It elegantly solves that frustrating dry mass problem. But catching it is only half the battle, right? The real test is, can China inspect, refurbish, and relaunch that booster cheaply and quickly enough to truly disrupt the economics of spaceflight? Well, we are going to find out later this year when they try to fly it again. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep your eyes on the skies.